Getting a replay on how monstrous Jeffrey Dahmer was and how his acts affected the families involved was a hard task for the cast. They had to follow a lot of rules, and one of them was strict point of view. The top strict rule the show's cast had to follow was to ensure they played out their roles in ways the viewers wouldn't sympathize with Jeff. Even though Jeff's childhood was slightly touched on and many factors that could have made him the way he was were considered, the cast had to tell his story in the monstrous way he carried them out, with no opportunity for viewers to make any excuse on his behalf. And so they managed to stick to the rule of not telling the story from Jeff's view. Evan, in an interview, explained this top rule, saying, "We had one rule going into this from Ryan, that it would never be told from Dahmer's point of view. As an audience, you're not sympathizing with him. You're not getting into his plight." He said they had to make it look like viewers were seeing who Jeff was from an outsider's view. Then Evan said it was important so they could see how that hurt many people. And even if the series is titled in Jeff's name, the story isn't to shed light on his life, but for the viewers to see how his actions ruined many lives and homes. Rashad Robinson, the president of Color of Change and a consultant on the show, said he wanted to ensure the film was more about humanity and the family involved. He said things like this are very critical because it isn't only about who Jeff was, but also about his victims who had great dreams and desires. And the cast followed this rule strictly by driving sympathy towards the victim instead of the criminal. Making thorough research. For a show based on a true story and real people, there was a need for the show's cast to carry out their research despite the scripts they were given. Because it's a sensitive topic that hurt many people in the past and still does, the cast had to respect that by making sure they knew what they were getting themselves into. For many of the cast, all that the show's creator Ryan Murphy gave them was the script and what the show was going to be about, but with the silent rule to do their research and work through how to bring all the emotions on the screen. Evan Peters, who played Jeffrey Dahmer, said he went ahead to start watching YouTube videos of Jeff's real-time interview with Stone Phillips when he was in prison the moment he was cast for the show. Evan mentioned he didn't stop there, as he had to learn about the Oxford apartment where most of Jeff's crimes occurred. Evan had to know all the details because of their importance to the project. The actor said, "I proceeded to read biographies. I also found some audio of what sounds like a psychologist interviewing him or even a detective who's relaying what he went through. And the way he speaks is very candid and very normal." Evan learned how to speak and practice how to walk like Jeff by watching many clips of him on YouTube. Of course, Evan wasn't the only cast member who did this. Niecy Nash, who portrayed Glenda Cleveland, also did her research, and she was moved at how Glenda's story wasn't much talked about before she got the script. According to Niecy, Glenda was also a victim of Jeff, and Niecy had to learn her story to portray her memory perfectly. Even though Glenda was honored with an award before her death, Niecy wanted to ensure everyone saw how she tried to stop Jeff from committing further crimes. The actress had to read up on Glenda's complaints to see how she really cared and was deeply involved in what happened to understand her role, focusing on the delivery. Jeffrey Dahmer's story has been told numerous times and has much attached to it in terms of materials. There are many references ranging from what was said in court to Jeff's official statements and interviews, so there was much to look into during research. But the rule here is not to bring every detail of the crime to the show, no matter how huge or entertaining it might seem, except the most important ones to pass the message and show the world what happened. Going through many materials to bring out key points isn't entirely an easy task, but the cast had no choice. And Evan said it became too much for him at one point because he was consuming so much of what he could find to portray some parts of his role while leaving some behind. The actor said, "I've read so much, I've watched so much, I've seen so much, and at a certain point you've got to say, all right, that's enough." He said although they were learning so much while filming, they needed to be guided and not get lost in the reason they were playing the story. Evan also mentioned that they had to tone down many things and understand which ones Jeff did in real life and the ones that he didn't, so they'd be able to get the aim right, playing convincing roles. When viewers watch the Jeffrey Dahmer story, it's as though they're watching the real Jeff and how every unit responsible failed to stop him. And this perfect portrayal is one of the few rules that the cast had to nail. The representation of every role in the show, especially that of Jeff, is so much talked about, which currently separates the film from other shows that have been done on the same topic. The representation of these real people wasn't an easy one for the cast to follow. Evan said he was scared when he knew he had to be Jeff. In his words, he said, "Honestly, I was very scared about all the things that he did, and diving into that and trying to commit to that was going to be one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life, because I wanted it to be very authentic." And he said before he could follow this rule, he had to shut himself out and enter some dark places for a very long time. There were times Evan almost lost it on set, but the actor said with the help of the crew members, he was able to keep himself in the role. Evan said he had never stretched himself to that extent before, and that following that rule cost him a lot. He became mentally depressed, and playing the character hurt his real self. However, for the actress Niecy, she said remembering the story on the news when she was still young was one of the things that helped her in playing the role just right, because she knew the key word flying around when the crime happened was racism and under-policing of some black environments. She could understand some of the show's focus and bring that to her role as Glenda. It was also a very complicated rule for Niecy to follow, as Glenda's story had never been told before, and she only had a few materials to work with to get it right. She recalled her toughest scene when Glenda had to go to Conorac's funeral and talk to his father about how she tried to save the boy and how she shouldn't have trusted the police to handle it. Niecy broke down in tears as she recalled the scene, and you can tell it was a very heartbreaking one for her to film and an even more difficult role to play. Respect the families. The Jeffrey Dahmer story is a very sensitive one, and many of the families who were affected would have to relive the traumatic experience if they saw the show. So, the cast needed to play out their roles in the most respectful manner. So, even though they knew it could hurt many of the families to see a replay of the things they passed through, they wanted it to be something that wouldn't also embarrass or disappoint them. Putting it directly, Evan said, "It felt important to be respectful to the victims' families, to try and tell the story as authentically as we could." For this rule to be followed, the show's creator Ryan made sure that the cast didn't treat the script as a documentary or tell it in the form of entertainment. It was mainly a show to touch on many aspects of how the system failed the victims, and they were to handle the filming of the show as though they were holding many people and factors responsible as part of the reason for the sad story. Right from the police, the justice system, to the media and many more. No polishing of the crimes. There's a thin line between acting out a crime for entertainment and acting out a crime that happened in real life. And that's one of the lines the cast tried not to cross. To respect the families involved and to save the viewers from many of the disturbing details, the cast had to stick to not overdoing it. Some of the things in the show needed to be included so viewers could see how much damage Jeff caused, but they had to do it in a way that didn't look like they were polishing his crimes. In following this rule, showing Jeff's cruelty is important to reduce the effects famous criminals have on viewers, and to make it very hard for anyone to consider themselves a fan. Maintaining this rule was an easy one for Evan and Glenda to pull through because they were also disgusted at the horrific nature of his crimes. Evan said, "You need to have certain plot points because he did these things, but you don't need to embellish them. You know, we get it. You don't need to see it over and over again." And so they were glad for this rule that didn't make them get so much into his dark crimes. But through their emotions and actions in the film, they could translate how big the crimes were without turning them into some entertainment. How well do you think the cast followed these rules? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching.